Dr. Mark Mayfield, LPC, NCC.
That's all I got.
That's all you got?
That's all I got.
Wow.
There's some people that I know that have like 15 more than that.
I mean, we could throw in Emdria, right?
No, I'm not certified.
Oh, not certified.
Just trained.
Okay. No Gottman training.
Well, yeah, I never put in for it though.
Okay. Wow. So you're leaving like letters at the just on the cutting room floor. Like you're not even.
Yep.
What the heck?
Well, we'll talk about this towards the end, but it really doesn't matter.
No, there's this thing in the field of counseling.
Well, just the field of mental health.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
Mental health and I think like physical health too.
True. And at first it kind of seems confusing, and then we ignore it, and then if we think about it, it gets even more confusing. And it's that we put these titles, these letters, these kind of certifications and yada yadas at the end of our names on everything: business card, door frame, company name, website, document, like all of it. And the question I've been grappling with...
The only one I'm going to fight you on is the doctor, because that put a lot of time and effort into that one.
You paid plenty of money to have a doctor at the
Yes,
beginning of your... 100%. No, I think that one
Yeah.
makes the most sense, but I think it makes the most sense...
Because it's universal.
Because people understand what it means.
Yeah.
If we polled just average individuals,
Sure,
regardless of their professional field, education status, age, whatever, I would wager that the majority, if not almost all, of people would have no idea what LPC, LPCC, LCSW, like all of these phrases that in our field we're super familiar with.
right.
They wouldn't know. And it's because they don't... This is going to make some individuals probably a little bit mad. They don't actually make a difference at the stage of relationship that they're used in.
Yeah, it's not equitable across lines, I think. And I think this is what really upsets your wife and upsets my wife too.
Mm-hmm.
When we're sitting around the table playing games, we try not to do,
Right.
work talk, and we're getting better at that.
Yeah, it comes out.
Sometime. But I remember you and I talking once. I don't know where we at, maybe at Ivy Wild or someplace, and we started talking in abbreviations.
Yeah.
And I could hear your wife take a big sigh. Okay, for the rest of us, explain what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that really helped us, I think, both of us, when we're doing this podcast of, okay, Trevor, what's rupture and repair?
Right.
What's EMDR?
Right.
That kind of stuff. But it's interesting, we talked about this in coffee this morning, like, why do we do that?
Yeah.
Like, is it, and I think in some ways it's almost an ego boost.
Yeah.
Or is it, what is the reason that we feel the necessity to flash our letters?
Yeah. I'm going to totally wipe over one of the most legitimate reasons. There's this concept in counseling that counselors are both the expert and not the expert, that we have to come in and be viewed as an expert by the client, but also we recognize that the client is actually the expert in the room because they know themselves better than we do.
And there's a reason that we use client versus patient. And,
totally.
There's reasons for all of this. But
there's a lot there, and I think that's the most legitimate reason. However, psychology today is a primary avenue for individuals to find therapists. Like, it's easy, it's accessible, it's
can be a little bit sketch if you don't know what you're doing.
Totally.
But yeah, it is the go-to.
And I think one of the reasons that it's sketchy is because there's this really frustrating thing in our field where we don't actually talk to clients. We talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
My putting LPCC, NCC at the end of my name says only things to other professionals.
That tells me where you are in your journey.
Yep. And if I was like the majority of the clients that I work with, probably don't even care.
Nope. Well, okay. What's the word I'm looking for?
Play devil's advocate?
No, to affirm what you're saying. I think it was probably a couple years ago, right after I got my doctorate.
Yeah.
Had a client come in and said, hey, I said, do you have any questions? We did the paperwork, went through disclosures, HIPAA, confidentiality. And the individual sat back and was like, yeah, just one question. like, why aren't you a registered psychotherapist? And I looked at him and I tried not to laugh. And I'm like, okay, tell me why you're asking that question. Well, just from my understanding, registered psychotherapist tells me that, like, that's the
Highest level.
highest level. And I said, oh, okay. I said, I didn't take it personally or anything like that. I said, let me educate you on this. And after I educated them, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no reason to be sorry at all. It was a genuine response because you didn't know. And when you see registered and psychotherapist, it makes sense that would be something that's important.
Yeah.
And so,
but you don't know what it takes. Like, unless you are in the field, you probably don't know what it takes to be an RP.
Right.
Probably don't know what it takes to be a licensed professional counselor. Probably don't know. Like, that process is not something that's common knowledge to the general populace. It's just our field. And I think I had a conversation with my brother-in-law. He was on Psychology Today and looking between 3 different therapists, and reached out to me and said, hey, can you look these over and tell me what you think? And I was honored and really excited and looked them over and did some deep dives into their website and what they said on Psychology Today and the different specialties that they offered, and called him back and gave him a breakdown of, this guy maybe approaches it in this way. He's using this language that would use this kind of approach, which is going to look this way in the counseling space. And he was like, I wouldn't have seen any of that. Like, there's no way. And it really made me think, like, I totally understood what was happening and was able to put together a good idea of who this therapist would be.
You've had X amount of years of indoctrination, if we want to use that terminology.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so if Psychology Today was meant for professional to professional, I think it would, almost everybody's profile in there would make sense.
Sure.
But it's not.
No.
It is for an individual who's looking for support. And so using language that is this hoity-toity, experty kind of lingo, and this is being really generalistic and pretty, unfair.
Sure.
Totally recognize that. But I think it is a disservice to our field to do it that way. And it would be so much better.
It's a fair statement.
To be relational.
Yeah.
And so if you go onto my Psychology Today, and you're welcome to
mine
look
too.
for it.
Mine is very relational as well.
It's talking to a person.
Yep.
And I try not to use jargon. I try to be invitational, because it's all about building rapport, which is a word that we use in counseling that is just, I like you, you like me, we can work together.
We're comfortable with each other.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we have alliance, which is we both know exactly what we're working towards and what we're doing to get there. And so you want to have a balance of alliance and rapport. And I would argue that the language and the lingo and the expertise kind of terminology that we use doesn't really do much for either. Maybe a little bit more on the alliance side, but even then, it's so much better for me to be able to approach it in, we're going to talk about rupture and rapport as part of our, or a rupture and repair as part of our process, and this is what this means. Maybe I don't need to explain that I'm approaching it from a systems perspective.
You focus on relationships, and you're desirous of reconciliation, and that people can be sad sometimes, and it might turn into depression. And that's what I've done on my Psychology Today too. And I think that goes back to a long time ago, and this is where a lot of people in the field fought this. I think probably about 2 years, 3 years before you started your program, the National Board for Certified Counselors was really pushing, we shouldn't be calling it NCC. Nobody knows what that means. We call it a board certified counselor. Yep. People understand board certified means, okay, there's something there that they've gone through. There's an accountability process. There's whatever. And I think that's awesome. And so I've advocated for, it's fine putting your credentials, but instead of putting LPC or NCC at the end, put licensed professional counselor underneath your name and board certified counselor. Okay.
Well, and I think having that information somewhere is necessary for informed consent. And
go back to our first season?
Yeah, I think it was second episode.
Second episode where we talked about this,
Yeah, we have to have that information available. Like, it's just it's mandatory, it's legal, it's ethical, it's important. But I also think that it's important to have that in the right places. And I doubt that we will ever see a day in our field where this changes.
No.
But I would love to have a space where you see the person's name and then information about them as the counselor that's in normal human language. And then you have the opportunity to look into licensure with information on what it means.
Right.
You know, the LPC, they've completed a master's degree with 1,000 hours of clinical experience and then did 2,000 hours of clinical or postgraduate work over the span of at most 4 years, minimum 2 years to get a full license.
It's our equivalency of a residency in some ways.
Yeah. And even just having that brief descriptor underneath it, like all of a sudden we've made it meaningful.
Right.
Rather than just being letters. Mm-hmm. It's now meaningful.
Well, I think a lot of it too boosts our ego, and I'll say that in a way that is probably going to make people pissed at me, but like it does boost our ego. Yeah. Like what I've accomplished, and I've got these letters after my name, and I've got these degrees, and great. Not once in the last 5 years has somebody asked me where I got my doctorate.
Oh no. Nobody's ever asked me where I got my degree.
Right.
Well, maybe my graduate, never my bachelor's, ever.
Well, yeah, and you know, having it hanging on my wall and that kind of stuff. But you know, I knock on wood, but I've never had a client come in and kind of go to my wall. And just,
your license number is 00.
Yeah. And you've only been licensed for, you know, 5. I don't know how many years I've been licensed now.
Yeah.
20.
But what about another counselor?
Yeah, sure, but I'm trying to think of an analogy that's not going to offend people. I mean, but it's almost like, you know, who's got the bigger house? Who's got the better car?
Yeah.
Oh, you went to Walden. You know, I went to Regent. People listening right now, like, what?
Yeah, who cares?
Who? Where?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, it's this idea of status, and
I mean, it only matters if you're like, I went to Harvard.
Well, even then, I think NPR.
Somebody would be real quick. Yeah. Somebody would be like, "So good for you! You spent $500,000 on your degree." Like,
somebody did a study, and NPR was talking about it, and I thought it was really interesting. They were looking at like success based on your college.
Okay. And, like where you went to school.
Yeah.
And then
does an Ivy League school actually increase your level of success?
Makes sense.
And what they found was there was some struggles in like getting appropriate data because a lot of individuals who would be naturally successful would go to these universities just because of social expectations and access and all those things. So,
Mommy and Daddy went to you know.
And so when you make accommodations for that being a part of the process, what they found was that except for individuals who have intersecting identities, so like Black women, where it's women and Black, except for those populations, there was pretty much no difference in your level of success based on your university. For those intersectionalities, there was like a less than 10% impact. And so it was more beneficial, but not in a major way. And I think that really released some sort of pressure on me of like, oh, so it doesn't matter where I go to school. It matters who I am.
Well, absolutely. It's funny because when I told people that I was doing my doctorate online, I would get this. And I'm like, well, they are, and again, for people listening, this is another, they are accredited.
Yeah. I'm
not going to give an acronym, but they're accredited by the highest level of counseling accreditation. It was the most rigorous academic experience I ever had. But people made assumptions that it wasn't because it was online.
Yeah.
And obviously that's changed in the last 6 years quite a bit. But it is interesting. And even in academia, it's very interesting. We still do this in academia, which really frustrates me because I'm very involved in certain organizations in this country that are not looked upon highly by other organizations in this country because they have a faith component or a spirituality component or you know, and it's not even though it's peer reviewed, it's not a peer reviewed, like art, so you didn't really get published. And I'm like, but why do we do that to ourselves? And I know to some degree, like in the field, we want to make sure that we're doing the highest level of research, and we're, that, how we present ourselves is growing the foundation of the profession and theories and all that kind of stuff. But I think majority of the people in my field as a PhD level counselor focus more on the academic pieces of things than they do on the let's make this accessible to people.
Right. Yeah, we lose focus of why we're actually doing this.
Right. It's great. I'm doing a study on neuroreactivity on sleep cycles with individuals that have had post-traumatic stress.
Okay.
Like, you got most of that.
I'm fully on board.
You're fully on board with that. Who cares?
Right.
Like, what? So I think for me, what I loved about my university is that there was a social justice component to every dissertation, meaning we have to show that this is going to impact the greater population versus just promote academic.
Yeah, it's a so what clause.
Yes.
You talk about that study, and the so what is if you are struggling with trauma and sleep difficulties, how are those two interacting with each other? And what does it mean for treatment?
Right.
How do you move forward? Do you...
Well, and like I'm doing research right now on cytokines and inflammation in the brain, and going, is it, can we link depression to a physical struggle that we can heal? Great.
So what?
So what? Well, okay, we want to broaden the field that not all depression is psychological. It could also be physiological, and there's a cure from a physiological standpoint if we actually do our deep dive. And but that's, so I think it goes back to the question of LPC, NCC, ABCD, EFG.
Right.
So what?
So what?
I'd love to hear your response to that, and I've got a response to that. But like, so what? So why is it important to show that we have letters?
I think some of it's gatekeeping, which is a big part of our profession.
Speak to that.
Gatekeeping is just ensuring that the individuals who are providing mental health services are not just trained and qualified, but operating ethically and legally.
Yeah.
And so, we are watching each other as counselors to ensure that we are taking care of the community and that there's nobody causing harm.
Some are more vigilant than others.
Absolutely. So I think that's a part of it. There's also this long-standing expectation that this is just what we do. I think the so what, from like a client perspective, is, I wonder what it would look like of, and I'm picking on Psychology Today because it's a little bit easier. But what would it look like where, in order to be on Psychology Today, you do have to meet certain gatekeeping expectations? And so I don't need to worry about, is this person a true professional operating ethically and legally, because they're on Psychology Today, so that means yes.
Right.
And our goal is, for Mayfield Counseling Centers, if you go to any of our staff, that is true.
Sure.
You don't have to worry about whether or not they are, at the level of certification and training that they need to be in order to provide support.
We gatekeep that for you.
100%, as employer, as company, as colleagues, as yada, 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 yada. Like that's necessary. But like private practices, you have to find ways to show that. And I think there's better ways than what we do.
Yeah.
What about you? You said you had a response.
Well, I think the so what is that if we're doing it well, and the so what is, it's about consumer protection. You can, people don't know this, but you can actually get the person's name and search them on a state database to go, okay, is their license in good standing? Now do a deep dive.
Right.
Right? Because I'll be honest, like I have a grievance on my license.
Yeah.
But if you do a deep dive, it has nothing to do with therapy.
No.
In fact, it was a one sentence response to somebody that I had never supervised.
Yeah.
Right.
Based on a supervision model that the regulatory board had disbanded like a month previous and never told anyone about.
Right. So you can see, okay, well, Mark's got a grievance. Well, click the button, read what it was about, how it was resolved, all that kind of stuff. there are people that have grievances out there that are still practicing, which I don't understand, that have some pretty egregious things. So you do your research. So this is, again, consumer protection, but I think the so what is that so people can be held accountable. And as clients, we want to empower them to do the deep dive, to do the research, to recognize, okay, in my state, it's an LPC or LCPC or something like that, licensed clinical professional counselor.
Yep.
Again, we're trying really hard as a national organization to get common language across state lines.
Which I think would be beneficial for huge. This conversation too.
Yeah. But I think that's the so what. It comes back to consumer protection.
Yeah.
Because if you see that they have an LPC, you know a couple things. Let's just
in Colorado, yeah.
In Colorado, licensed professional counselor means a couple things. It means, one, every 2 years, they have to renew their license, pay a fee, create a health profile where they're showing continuing education, and two, you know that they went to get the LPC. They went through an accredited program that was rigorous. And if they didn't go through an accredited program, they still had to jump through a lot of hoops to prove that their program that they went through was equivalent to the accredited program.
And if not, make up the difference.
And not make up the difference in education. That's what that means. Now, it's still on the consumer, in my opinion, just as it is on us to do their research. So I always tell clients, like, this might not be a good fit. Ask questions. I'm an open book. Share your opinions. Push back. When I talk with family members or friends, I'm like, take 3 or 4 questions. Interview your therapist. If they don't provide you a 15 to 20 minute option to talk to them on the phone before you sign up for the first session, run. Go someplace else. If they don't tell you in the first session, this might not be a good fit, and so we're going to really look into whether this is going to, we're going to work well together, build that rapport, that relationship piece. Like, run.
Right.
Like, it's not about the almighty dollar, and it's not about us feeling good by making that connection. If you and I was the counselor, you were the client, and I was so concerned about you liking me, that's dangerous.
Right. Or seeing you as an expert who's like,
right.
Don't you know that I'm a published author and that there are people in this state that look up to me as a forefront expert and blah, blah, blah.
Run.
Right. That's not healthy.
No. And so I think you have to have those expectations. But I think the detriment to just having letters behind our name is that we do then exert ourselves and put ourselves out there as experts. And you glossed over this at the beginning. We are experts and we're not experts.
Yeah.
We're experts because we went to school and we know human behavior, we know emotions, we know neuroscience, we know biology, all this kind of stuff.
We are practicing the craft of relationship and in counseling.
And the client should be the expert on their own life.
Sometimes I'm simply an excuse to grow for my clients.
Absolutely.
And those are really fun relationships where it's super obvious I'm just your excuse to grow and develop right now.
Yeah, when I have a married client, it's my, this is an excuse for you to be challenged in some of your blind spots.
Right.
Right.
This is an excuse for you to talk about things that are hard.
Yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. Look, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to be your excuse.
And we could go, 1,000 different ways in this. I think there's more conversations to come, but I want you to hear as you listen to this, don't just take somebody's word for it. Don't just look at the letters behind their name and go, well, look at them. They're fancy. They must be knowing what they're talking about. If that's what it is, we have done a huge disservice to society. And I think so as a consumer, as a client, if you want to know what questions to ask, go listen to the first couple episodes of our podcast in season 1. Email us, ask us, what do I need to look for? And we can give you 3 or 4 questions to ask and things to look for that I think should be accessible to everybody. And that's just my 2 cents.
Yep. I totally agree with that. And I think just knowing that you have the ability to ask those questions and to ask questions that are going to make you feel more comfortable and understand what's happening, and knowing that one of the deficits of counselors, this whole field, is that we do get caught up in acronyms and language that is common for us, but doesn't exist outside of our field. And so you as a client or anyone, you have the ability to ask those questions of like, hey, what do you mean when you say this?
Right.
Or what is this concept that you mentioned? Or what's this acronym that you mentioned? Because we might forget. It's a deficit to us that we frequently forget because we're just talking in shorthand.
Yeah. Ask.
This you're right. Your ability, in some ways, your responsibility too.
And if you get pushback for asking, you have the right to quit.
Yep.
Well, not quit. Fire.
Yeah.
Fire that therapist and go find somebody else. Don't give up.
Nope.
It might take 2 or 3 times. I hope it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it might take 2 or 3 times.
I tell my clients this frequently, and I would say this to any client of any therapist. You have the right to stand up in the middle of a sentence, walk out of the space, and say, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done with this counseling space. I don't want to see you anymore.
You're condescending. You're this, that, other thing. Yeah.
You're right.
Yep.
And if a client ever does that to me, I probably will follow them out of the building and say like, hey, can I at least get you connected with somebody new?
Right.
Like, what can we do to repair a rupture that has happened in this space?
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I'm not going to chase you down. It's your right. You have full permission and full ability. Walk away.
Yep.
It's your space, your therapeutic space, not ours.